Okay, let's get started. Super weird to stand in front of people again, just saying that. I remember last time I was in front of people, I just opened up a news app and I saw like the Bundesrat said, okay, we're going into lockdown. And I knew, okay, that was it for the next couple of months. Um, so yeah, welcome to the last presentation, I think, today. I think it's the last row of presentations. Hopefully see you all at the upper row later on. My name is Thomas Maurer. I started working at Microsoft um, a uh, 1.5 years ago. Oh, wait, that's not good. You're welcome, Microsoft shareholders. Um, huh? Yeah, I don't know. It could be a coincidence, but it's hard to believe, right? So in this session, we are going to talk about Azure Hybrid. And I will talk a lot about the new things we will show you, and I'm super happy that so many people are here. Before I really want to start, I mentioned it before, I'm super happy that we are in 2020, have some more things to go, and I'm really happy that we can all admit it was a crazy year, right? So definitely happy. And it's great to have this view instead of this view right now, because I've spent at least 6 or 7 months having this view right now without any travel, without doing anything else than sitting there. So in this session, we are going to talk about hybrid management. So what does that mean? I'm going to talk a little bit about Azure Arc. I'm going to have a little bit of a view of Azure Stack, and we're going to see how you can leverage Azure in a hybrid world, right? And I promise you, I will have a lot of demos. So bear with me with a couple of slides, and the rest will be live demos. So yeah, we'll see about that. Before I start, though, and going into the technology, let me first talk a little bit about why we're actually doing this and why hybrid is a big deal. So what we realized when we were looking at customers and working with our partners and so on is that IT departments in general, or customers in general, their environment getting increasingly complex. And what are the main reasons or the top reasons why that is? So a typical IT departments manages hundreds or if not thousands of different applications, right? And some of these applications, they can be very modern applications written with very modern languages, can be serverless, containerized, all this goodness running on PaaS services and so on. But we also have a lot of these traditional applications which run on virtual machines or even on physical servers. And guess what? These applications are not going anywhere in the next couple of years, right? They're obviously getting modernized, but we will not get rid of them in the next 2 years. So we have, or IT departments in general, they need to manage that, like that whole bandwidth of these applications. Another thing we can see is that they have a lot of diverse infrastructure. What do we mean with that? They run their own data centers. They probably also outsourced a couple of things to service providers. They run branch offices or stores. They have different types of hardware in use. A lot of probably IoT projects now happening as well. And so all of that needs to be managed as well, right? So we need to have kind of like all these different devices, all these different locations as well. And speaking about locations, the last one is multi-cloud. I also see that as one of the challenges we see a lot with a lot of customers who actually decide to go with multiple cloud providers. And some of them did that by choice, right? They did, or not really by choice. They started, probably one department started with one cloud provider, and they decided then to move to Microsoft Azure for the main project, which is, by the way, an excellent choice to do. But they're probably not going to migrate all over just right now, because again, that's investment of money, and probably the benefit is not that huge in that case. And then there are obviously also strategic decisions to use other cloud providers. This can be disaster recovery reasons, can be that they like a certain service better at another cloud provider than in Azure, which I find hard to believe, but just kidding. Of course, can be a case, right? So IT departments also need to manage all of that, right? And so they need to take care of all of these applications. And so you need to have control, and I found this morning, I found this one. It's actually super interesting. It's like coffee machines getting hit by ransom attacks, right? So you need to have that management becomes more and more important, right? And I'm not going to talk too much about IoT in this session, no worries, but you see that you have, like, when you run all these machines everywhere, let's talk about servers, simple plain servers. We run them everywhere, right? And we need to have control over these, because now even coffee machines get attacked. So this is a screenshot from Microsoft Ignite last year in 2019, and this is Jason Sanders. Who knows who Jason Sanders is? Okay. He is the engineering lead under Scott Guthrie for all the Azure engineering parts, so for all the Azure services, if you will. And he had the keynote directly after Satya, and he was talking mostly about hybrid. Azure Hybrid was a big topic, and you can also see that on this slide as well. I'm not going to go too deep in that slide because I have a lot of that later on to share, but he made one sentence which was very, very important. He said, hybrid is not just going to be in-between state until everything is moved into the cloud. Hybrid is an end state for our customers, right? We strongly believe at Microsoft that our customers are not moving everything to the cloud. Like, maybe some customers do that, depending on their business case, depending on all of that, but not everything, right? Not every customer can do that. There are many, many reasons, and I'm sure everyone here in the room knows a lot of these can be governance, technical reasons, and so on, why things don't move to the cloud. Now, the second point I want to make is, obviously, Azure Arc and Azure Stack, these are our, kind of like, if you look at it, our flagship products when it comes to hybrid, right? But there is much, much more, right? If you look at the whole IoT suite as well, which you also consider hybrid, and then what a lot of people don't know is that already many of our Azure services, our management services and security services like Sentinel, Security Center, like also when you look at DevOps tooling, they're already supporting hybrid for years, right? We already have these services. You can already leverage Azure services for your on-premises deployments as well. And Azure really is built from the ground up to be hybrid, right? We have this experience with Windows Server, with SQL Server, all these applications we shipped into data centers, which we actually learned how that works and how it is to operate that. So we don't think that there's just a single solution when it comes to hybrid, right? It's not just like we have here, this is the solution you go when you want to do hybrid. We have a portfolio of hybrid services, and I think that one is also very important to understand, because I get a lot of questions always when you announce a new service. Is that now going to replace this? Is that now going to replace that? That's not necessarily the case, right? They can extend each other. So this is a kind of like a newer slide of that, what we have in our hybrid world. And they liked that slide because they said it's a little bit easier to understand, which we can disagree about. But let's start on the bottom right here. So with Azure IoT, again, I'm not talking too much about IoT. This is not the session for it. But again, if you work with IoT devices, we have a whole set of products and services to manage that. We also have a portfolio of products when it comes to, or a portfolio of services and solutions. If you look at the middle case when it comes to Azure Stack, right? Azure Stack is not just one single solution anymore. It's a portfolio. So we have Azure Stack HCI, which we had a session from Karsten, which is our hyper-converged virtualization solution. You have Azure Stack Hub and Azure Stack Edge. So we have many, many different solutions there, which we help to modernize and build, use this cloud-inspired hardware and architecture in your data center, right? Because these services in your data center or at your location, they need to run somewhere. And then it's also about bringing Azure services wherever you need them, right? It's about bringing them, not just having them in Azure in one region. We are lucky in Switzerland. We now have 2 Azure regions. But in some cases, you probably want to run them in your own data center. They want to run, probably you want to run it in your retail store, right? You want to run it in your branch office. So that is some plan we have as well. And I want to make another very important point here. When we speak about hybrid, for us, hybrid in the past was really like on-premises and Azure. And today, when we talk about hybrid, it's about on-premises, Azure, other cloud providers, and the edge, right? So when we talk about, and I tell you, okay, you can manage your servers on-prem. It's not about just your on-prem server. It can also be your server running in Google or in AWS or other cloud providers, right? So that is a very important part. And then the most important part, that is where I'm going to talk about the most time today, is about this middle line here, the single control plane. And that is where Azure Arc comes in a big way. So when we talk about having a single control plane with Azure Arc, so that means that we actually, just as I said, manage on-premises, multi-cloud, and edge environments. So our customers came and said, hey, Thomas, look, it's great that we have all these Azure management tools, right? We can manage all our Azure services. But why can we not just use them to manage also services and stuff which is running outside of Azure the same way as we can do with Azure services? And that is exactly what Azure Arc, where Azure Arc comes in. So when we speak about the control plane today, it's about govern and managing resources at scale. So meaning that like all resources in Azure, but then also obviously extending that to things outside of Azure. Bring down developer cloud practices. So that means like if you're using Azure, you probably start using DevOps principles, right? And you want to probably extend that in a cloud way as well. And then obviously take advantage of Azure security to bring that to any platform. And so with that, I quickly want to switch to a demo as promised. Like, because what did you just say, Thomas? Can you please explain that a little bit and make it more clear? So here we are in the Azure portal. You can see that I'm in the all resources blade. And you can see here, that was I was actually mentioning, right? You can see here I have a ton of Azure resources. Everything in Azure basically is an object. Doesn't matter if it's a firewall, a virtual machine, a public IP address, a routing table, a disk, PaaS services, a database, and so on. And as you all know, we can manage these. They have a type, they have a resource group. Let me see if that works. They are joined to or deployed in Azure region, and they belong to a subscription. And I can also use, for example, tags to organize them, right? That is what we had a long time. Now, Thomas, wouldn't it be great if we can leverage that for our resources outside of Azure? And that is exactly where Azure Arc comes in. So what I'm going to do here, to make it a little bit easier to make my point, I'm just going to select virtual machines and Arc servers. So basically, I now can see here, I limited to only Azure virtual machines and Arc servers, and I will tell you a little bit about more in a bit. But you can see here now, I can see my virtual machines running in Azure side by side with servers running outside of Azure, right? So you can see them here. They also belong to a resource group. They belong to a subscription. They even connected to an Azure region. And I will show you how that all works. I can also use tags for these resources. So for example, let me say, hey, I want to do like some filtering here. I want to find out the cost center. So let's say I want to find all machines, all servers in this case now, which belong to a specific cost center. If I select that, you can see here now I find an Azure VM and a server running outside of Azure. It doesn't matter where this server is running, I see them all specific to that cost center. So I can already get that overview about all my systems. I get that inventory, right? So that's already a large benefit here to do that. Now you also say probably, okay, that's nice, Thomas, but it's not that impressive. There must be more, right? So another thing I want to show you now, since we are, and I will show you how you connect a resource to Azure Arc in just a bit. But since that resource is now showing up in Azure, I can start using Azure management tools for that resource. So let me show you Policy. Who in the room is familiar with Azure Policy? Okay, kind of like half of the room. So Azure Policy, the default basically allows us to configure our Azure environment, right? So I can set certain rules and stuff like that to make sure that I can keep control about my environment. So you can see companies, when they start with Azure and they don't have governance in place, they don't have policies in place and blueprints, what happens is that developers go out or IT people go out and just deploy stuff. And you have no control where to deploy it, how big it is. And that is where Policy can come in. So with Policy, I can, for example, restrict in which Azure regions you can deploy stuff, or which virtual machine sizes you can deploy. We have this great thing called the MV2 series virtual machines. They have a couple of hundred virtual cores, I think up to 12 terabytes of memory, and they drain your credit card in like 3 seconds. So you don't want any developer just going out and deploying these machines, right? You want to keep that control, but still give them the speed and agility the cloud promises. So that is there, and then what a lot of people don't know is that this can go even further, right? It's not just about the Azure environment. Think about the virtual machines and the operating systems you run in Azure, right? You also want to configure these, right? And for Windows machines, we probably think about group policies or something like that. Now, with Azure guest configuration policies, think about group policies on steroids. So this allows us to manage the operating system settings of Linux and Windows virtual machines in Azure. And I'm going to show you a quick example here. I can do an assignment. I'm going to assign an initiative. So initiative is just a collection of policies. And you can see here, when you start with policy, you can find that we have some built-in ones you can just start using. And you can find here a ton of them. Just want to make a quick pitch on policies right now. There are certain just very basic technical ones, but you can also see, that you also have, for example, some of them built on certifications like UK NHS. So you get that certification, Australian government, and so on. So you can configure your Azure environment in that specific way. Now, what I want to do is a simple task. I want to audit my machines if they have insecure password settings, right? So if one of my virtual machines has insecure password settings, I want to know about it. So I can just go out and obviously deploy that policy, and I have already done that because like in a good cooking show, I'm obviously prepared. So I deployed that, and that will then go out and check your environment, and that's why I prepared it. It will take a couple of minutes time, and we don't have time, right? So I already did that. And you can find here on the compliance view, I can actually find all my assignments. So you can see here, I have a couple of non-compliant policies here, and you can see, luckily, as a good employee as I am, I also have some compliant policies in my environment, which I know, okay, I'm actually compliant with that. Now here you can see I have the insecure password settings, and that is not compliant. So I know, okay, I have a couple of machines here which are not secure or not configured securely. So now you can see here, again, since it's a collection of different policies, you can see here some of them I'm compliant, some of them not. But more interestingly, I want to know which virtual machines are actually not compliant, right? So I can go to non-compliant resources. And if the portal would work, yes, it does. I can see here now all the machines which are not compliant with that. Like the operating system settings allow basically to have insecure password settings. So you can see here now, if I look closer, some of them are Microsoft.compute virtual machines. So that are actually Azure virtual machines. But with Azure Arc, I can now also see my Microsoft.hybrid compute machines, which are actually my servers running at home underneath my desk, for example, or in my data center. So I can see them as well. And I use those policies not just to manage my Azure VMs, but actually also manage my machines running in a hybrid environment, right? And they could, for example, also run at AWS or any other cloud provider. Now, so how do we do that? And this is a high-level architecture diagram, if you will, for Azure Management. And no worries, you don't need to look at all at the same time. So what we do is we start on the left side. We as Azure customers, we are basically using tools like the portal, like PowerShell, Bash, CLI, APIs, and whatnot to manage Azure resources. And when we do that, we are actually working with Azure Resource Manager, right? That is actually where the magic happens. Some of you maybe know in the early stages of Azure when we had the classic portal, that was called the Service Management API. That was kind of like the old style stuff. And then we realized to manage like more resources, you need to have something better, and that is where Azure Resource Manager came in. And Azure Resource Manager provides things like access and security control, like role-based access, logs, tagging, subscription management, policies, blueprints, and all of that basically I showed you to basically organize your resources. Then on top, you can see we also have our different management services for update management, monitoring, backup, and all of that. And these pillars were basically there for all our Azure services, right? We have now, I think, soon like over almost, I think, 300 maybe soon of Azure services. Now, as I said, our customers told us, why can we not just use the same things to use like to manage resources outside of Azure? And that is where Azure Arc comes in. So Azure Arc really extends the Azure Resource Manager to bridge basically resources outside of Azure with Azure Resource Manager, right? If you see that with bridge, you see what I did there. So you can then manage services at customer's location, meaning again, in your on-premise data center, in your store, or at another cloud provider. And today we have like basically three high-level services which you can connect. I'm going to talk mostly about server because I think that is the easiest example. But you can also connect Kubernetes clusters to do the same thing, or data services. And data services is a little bit special. I will talk a little bit about that as well. You can also, for example, use that for SQL servers to, for example, do security scans on your on-prem SQL servers as well. So, oops, that was not the plan. The plan was going back into the presentation. So I showed you now how that actually looks like. But what mostly now is the question is, how do I get my resources in there, right? Like everyone is like, yeah, I want to know, how did he get that? So it's very simple. We have this new, this is new since Microsoft Ignite last week. It's the Azure Arc Center. We don't write it somewhere, but if you look at the URL, it's actually the Azure Arc Center. And that is where you go and you can control and manage all your Arc resources in a single spot. And you can see here on the left side, the resources I just managed. Servers is, by the way, now in general availability, so it's out of preview, so you can use it today with full support. You can also start paying for it. I will talk about that at the end. And then we have Kubernetes cluster support, SQL Server, data controllers, and Azure Stack HCI, which is also connected to Azure using Azure Arc. Now, let's have a look at servers. So I can look at servers here, and you can see here are all the servers I connected. Sorry. And you can see here, some of them are currently running, they are connected. Some of them I removed, they're expired. Some of them are currently offline. I have no idea why, but whatever. So how do I get them in there? We made it very simple. It's basically an agent. You install that server, and that agent connects to Azure. It's basically outgoing traffic to Azure, port 443. So it's secured, it's encrypted, and that's basically it. There's no ingoing traffic or anything like that. So to add a server, we made it also very easy. We have two methods to onboard the server currently. One is an interactive script. So if you want to onboard one server, you basically run that script, and then you need to log in with your credentials and connect it to Azure. But as you can imagine, if you do that for hundreds of servers, you probably don't want to log in of each of your servers. You want to automate that. And that's also the recommended way, is using a service principal, which generates a service principal, which basically only has permissions to onboard new servers. Now, to show you how that actually looks like, I go in here, and this is basically then the wizard, which helps you generate that script, right? It's very simple. You can also create it yourself. You can read the documentation, but the wizard here helps. And you can also see, first step, what you actually need. As I mentioned, port 443, local administrator rights to install the agent, and then a resource group to actually connect. So the wizard goes in and helps me select the things I want to do. So I select my resource group, and my subscription first, obviously, and then my resource group. So I have one here somewhere. So my Azure Arc one. I also need then to connect, that server needs to connect to one of our Azure regions, right? Somewhere, and I obviously want to select the latest, the closest one. So we have a couple of regions. Not every region is supported currently, but that's where it's connected to. And it's only about metadata management, right? It's not doesn't mean that there is any data from that server is transferred to that. So you select basically the closest one. You also select which operating system that script runs. That also depends if it's a PowerShell script or if it's a Bash script. Let's just keep a Windows here. And then if the server is behind a proxy, you can also configure that. I can also go and, for example, add some tags here. There's already like predefined for location tags and stuff like that. But you can also obviously use your own custom tags. For example, if I click here, you can see here I can, for example, add the cost center tag or whatever I have here already prepared. I'm not going to do that right now. You can always do that later. And then at the end, you get basically the script. You can copy paste that and run it, or you can download the command and run it on your machine. That will then, as you can see here, download the agent in the Windows world. And this is an MSI file which you download. You install that, and then with the last command, you basically go out and register that server to your tenant, to your subscription, your resource group you just selected, and it shows up after a couple of seconds. It shows up in the Azure portal. So that is how you actually add a server here. Now, again, as I said, the server then, when I run this, will show up in a bit. But as always, I already prepared something. So we'll just select one of these servers here. And now the question is, what can I actually do with a server? What is like, you showed me policy, but what more can I do? So what I have here, as you can see here, if I click one of our Azure Arc servers, I can actually have a look at it, and you see, oops, it looks like an Azure resource, right? You can see it's, as I said, resource group, location, subscription, and so on. And you get some additional information here. What operating system is it, which agent I have installed, and so on. And then I have obviously like role-based access control, I have tagging, and I think that role-based access control is one of the most important parts about it. Since now it is an Azure resource, I can now say, okay, I want this server only be managed from a specific group, right? So the SharePoint admins, for example, like if I have a SharePoint team, they should not see all my servers wherever they're running. They should only see their SharePoint servers, right? So I can add a group to that, and as I would do for an Azure resource, I can do that for an on-prem machine as well. And that is how this whole thing is built. Now, what can I do with that machine? I start on the bottom here. On the top. Slight change of plans. So what I can do here, and that you probably are aware of from Azure VMs, you're probably aware of extensions, right? So Azure VMs have this thing called extensions. And if you deploy an Azure VM, on this VM, there's also a small agent deployed, which communicates with the Azure backend. And you can do some advanced things like when you do backups and security and stuff like that. Now, a team actually was very smart when they did this. This agent simulates this Azure Arc agent, or the Azure Connected Machine agent, as it's called, simulates basically the API for the extensions. So the teams who are using this, creating these VM extensions, they don't need to do a big rewrite of their extensions when they are on an Arc machine. They can basically use the same code as well. So I have a couple of extensions here I can deploy. So since it's a Windows machine, I can see here I can run the custom script extension for Windows. I can use PowerShell desired state configuration, or I can go out and automatically also deploy the log analytics agent. In that case, I would just go here and I would need to enter the workspace ID and the key. So that about the extensions. And when I have deployed the log analytics agent, I can now go to logs, for example, and have a log view of that specific server. So I can access all the logs I have configured. And now some of you probably say, yeah, but I could have done that with log analytics before. What's the difference now with Azure Arc? Well, the difference is here that before, if you wanted to give someone access to the logs in log analytics, you gave him actually access to the log analytics workspace. and he was able to see all the logs of all the systems in that specific log analytics workspace. Now, with Azure Arc, you can see here the scope now is only that specific VM. So I can now go and run, for example, different queries here. So one of them, for example, is the update summary. So I get then, as a result, the update summary here. And again, this is using the keyword query language, as you know from log analytics, right? This is not something new. This is really the same thing. But now with the RBAC system, I basically get access to that. I can also enable Azure Monitor for that VM or for that physical server. Again, could be a physical server, could be running in AWS, whatever. And I get some information. I get also this dependency map, so I can see, okay, my server connects to different ports, or I call it endpoints because it can be like, could be servers, but could be also public endpoints, right? So you can see here that my server connects to a couple of HTTP ports here, whatever that is. If I go down, I think this one is interesting. So this one is connecting to my local domain controller, for example, and I see that there's some communication going on, which is actually a feature as you get it from Azure Monitor, right? If you're used to Azure Monitor in Azure, it works the same way with these machines as well. I also can go and see some performance data on that machine, and you can see here, as I can see like disk performance, memory, CPU cycles, and so on. Now, when it comes to operations, I have also auto tasks here as well. I quickly want to go to policy. That's what I just showed you before. Before I showed you that as kind of like the global policy administrator over the whole environment. Now I'm the server admin, and now I see only the policies which are assigned to my specific server. So I'm now interested in, okay, why I'm not compliant. And you can see here, okay, great job on all these policies, right? But you can also see that this server, for example, has insecure password settings. So I can go and say, okay, I need to go fix that. I also have another one which I'm not compliant, and this one audits my VMs that they are specifically set to a specific time zone. So I want all my servers running in that case in that specific time zone, and I can see here my server is not compliant, and now I can go out and manually fix that. Or I can also create a remediation task here, and then go out and it will basically change the time zone on that specific server and so on. Again, this is still like a part, is partly in preview, the guest configuration part, but that is basically the goal of it, right? I can directly fix it. For some tasks, I can directly fix it from here. For others, we say you need to do that manually because it's too risky for us to go and change these settings for that. Good, but then speaking about policies, what is also very interesting, we can onboard that to Azure Security Center. So Azure Security Center obviously also deploys some of the policies and can tell us, hey, what's going on with your server? What are the security recommendations? And again, this really helps you. If you manage a lot of different servers, wherever they're running, you get that great overview. You can also go and use change tracking and inventory. So you're also, those are familiar management services. They existed for a while, but they're now integrated with Azure Arc. So I can see here the changes happening on that specific server. I can see here there's like different services and software which got installed and so on. The same thing when I go to inventory, I can actually see here my software installed on that machine, right? I can see a couple of updates and so on. I can also see the Windows services. Now, one of the most interesting services, I think, is Update Management. So as a good administrator as I am, I usually deploy all my updates. That's why only one is missing. And that's a definition update, so it's not even that critical. But now what I want to do is I want to patch that server. So I can directly go here and say, schedule an update deployment directly from the Azure portal. So let's call that update job on-prem. Because this machine obviously runs on-prem. It automatically detected that this is a Windows machine. I can configure the reboot options. So reboot if required sounds good, but I can obviously also select other things as well. And then let me schedule that. So what we have here is also the update now option. Update now means actually the job will start in around 5 to 10 minutes to actually go out and update that server. But yeah, it's probably not that handy if I do that right now because I still have a demo to do, right? So let's schedule that for a little bit later when I actually have a maintenance window, and I can select another time here. And then the great thing is I can say, let's create a recurring task for that so that we do like a weekly or monthly update cadence on that, or even hourly, which is also very handy very often. You're still awake, that's great. And then you can do some like select, okay, which classifications you want to install. That is also, for example, why you needed to select if it's a Linux or a Windows machine. It's obviously because updates work differently on Linux and Windows. You can select that. In my case, I want to do all. I can include specific KBs or exclude specific KBs. I can run pre and post scripts as well on that machine. So if I need to run something in addition, I can do that too. And at the end, I can create that update job, and this will now run. Now, people again will tell me, Thomas, again, it's nice, but I have hundreds of servers, so I need to do that 100 times. No, obviously, Update Management is a service, again, which exists for a long time in Azure Automation, but not a lot of people knew about it. So as well as like change tracking and inventory, you have Update Management, so it directly brings me to my automation account together with my Log Analytics workspace, and you can see here an overview, again, all of my machines. Doesn't matter, you can see here, some of them are running in Azure, some of them are non-Azure machines, and if I wanted to, I could basically go out and schedule an update deployment for a group of servers. I can do even smart things like a dynamic group by a specific tag, for example. Let's say like group 1 of servers will be always patched on every Tuesday, group 2 will be patched on Thursday. So you can move that around and organize your servers here on that. So that's I think it's pretty cool. So this is how that looks like. Before I move back, again, I want to quickly highlight, as you can see here, you have some other stuff going on here. One of the things we're not talking too much about it, unfortunately, is like the SQL Server part. So if you have a SQL servers running in your on-prem environment, you can also connect them to Azure Arc. And you get some benefits, like, for example, security recommendations. So you can take advantage of Azure Security Center, and this will give you like different recommendations what you should do. What I have not configured, you can also see that it says, okay, I have not all updates installed on that machine, and so on. And then I can even go and do some on-demand health checks on that specific SQL server as well, where you get like a little bit more information about weight and what should go on to secure your systems, right? So it's not just about, I showed you the server part, but as you can see here, it's not just about just servers. That also works with your Kubernetes cluster. So if you want to make sure your Kubernetes cluster is configured in a safe way, the right ports are open, the right ports are closed, you can do that as well. Good. So with that, I showed you how to onboard the server. Here are a couple of key takeaways now what I just told you about the server part, right? So first of all, it's great to have like an inventory. So you get an inventory of all your Windows and Linux servers, physical and virtual machines running in your own data centers or at other cloud providers. Doesn't mean you should go out and deploy them all at your other cloud providers, right? Just saying. It's completely domain agnostic. You can start using that and get that inventory. Think about scenarios, what we see. We have a couple of customers and we released a list of customer cases which are already using Azure Arc for servers. Think about if you, for example, manage different branch offices and environments and you want to have a control over all your systems and an inventory and see what's going on, where something is wrong, where you missed an update, where there is a misconfiguration. You can do that using Azure Arc very, very easily without having any VPN set up or anything like that. You can then take advantage of governance and security. So you can use the policy part I just showed you. You can also take security baselines. Together with Azure Security Center, you get a compliance view. And again, one of the big parts here, you get role-based access control. So you can, again, group your servers and give access to the specific people. It also supports Azure Lighthouse. So for the managed service providers in here, you can also take advantage of that. And then again, you can manage these resources at scale. That's the part I showed you at the beginning. You get that searchable inventory. I mean, with my 10 servers in the environment, it's probably not that interesting, but if you manage hundreds of servers, you get the point, right, where you actually can easily take advantage of the Azure management experience. Speaking about that, you get the portal experience, but obviously you can also use APIs and PowerShell and all that to manage your Arc resources as well. Now, I talked a little bit about the Arc part. I want to make or server part. I want to make a step back and talk about the other things as well. As I mentioned, if you look at Arc customer cases, one again is like organizing and govern all your resources. And this is not just for servers, but also for your Kubernetes clusters. You can also onboard your Kubernetes clusters wherever they are running. And then an advantage of this is then also that you can configure app management. For that, we use a technology called GitOps. So what you can do is like you check in code into a Git repository, and then with the configuration, it automatically deploys that on your Kubernetes cluster wherever that is running, right? So if you want to update an application, a containerized application on your Kubernetes clusters running wherever they are, you can do that with the help of Azure Arc. And then the last one I want to talk a little bit about more is about data services. I showed you the SQL part, where you can actually manage SQL Server, but that's not the whole story. The whole story about Azure Data Services, as well as bringing Azure SQL, like the real Azure SQL, to your on-premises environment, right? Or to another cloud provider again. So our customers told us they love Azure SQL. Azure SQL is really like, it scales automatically, it's secure, they don't need to take care of it, it updates itself, all of that, right? But for some reason, they cannot use that on-prem, they cannot use that in Azure region. Again, could be data sovereignty reasons or latency reasons, right? We see that a lot, that sometimes even with having a close region, some applications, they need just a couple of milliseconds latency. And with Azure Data Services, we're doing exactly that. We are bringing Azure SQL and Azure Postgres directly into the customer's data center or wherever they want to do that. They could even run Azure SQL in another cloud provider. And I'm going to show you a little bit in this last slide, I think almost last slide, how that looks like architecture-wise. No worries, we will start again from the left side. Again, if we manage Azure resources, we are using Portal CLI, SDK, and again, we are working with the Azure Resource Manager. Again, gives us RBAC, policy, and all the things I talked about. Now in blue, you see now the Arc-specific stuff. So when we start on the bottom, we have a resource provider, which is a resource provider for servers. So every Azure service usually has a resource provider, which is basically the intelligence and can dock into Azure Resource Manager. And then we have an agent. That's the agent I told you, deployed on a server, and that connects to that resource provider, and that gives us the management capabilities. Now in the middle, we have the Kubernetes management. So Azure Arc Kubernetes for enabled Kubernetes clusters. Again, that's also working with an agent on your existing Kubernetes cluster. And that can be also OpenShift or any kind of like Kubernetes cluster, right? That doesn't need to be like some specific version of Kubernetes running in your location. If your company decided to use OpenShift, that's fine. We can also connect OpenShift Kubernetes clusters to Azure. And then obviously we can configure that, and we can use services like Azure Container Registry and connect that. And on the top, you can actually see the data services part. As you can see, also that works with an agent. And then you see that Azure Arc Data Controller. That is actually the piece which does the intelligence for Azure SQL, to deploy Azure SQL on-prem. Now, the requirements to deploy that, the only thing you need is a Kubernetes cluster, right? So Azure SQL basically runs on top of a Kubernetes cluster in your data center or in your branch office or wherever you have it. And then you can take advantage of that. So what I quickly want to mention as well here, Azure Arc is not there to take just do all the management for you. If you still have existing tools you want to use for server management, for your Kubernetes clusters, data services, you can still use those specific tools, right? It's not there to replace all of that. You can still use them because you also don't want to build like dependencies on Azure, right? Or on the internet connectivity. You want to keep that independent. You want to take advantage of Azure, but not build a dependency. Good, and then we do another step back. Again, that's the slide I showed you before with Jason Sanders. Azure Arc is just one of our hybrid solutions, if you will. There's a ton more, like Azure IoT, the Azure Stack portfolio with our different solutions there. And then obviously a lot of the management and security stuff. And I think Azure Arc really becomes, it is the bridge between your between Azure and actually the resources living outside of Azure. I think that is the key message here, which you then can go out and manage your resources. So with that, I want to thank all the sponsors, and we have a couple of minutes for questions if there are any. Are there any questions? No, Carsten, you were first. that Now is the time. Okay, that's actually fantastic because first of all, Azure Arc for servers, the basic is free. So with a little asterisk, obviously, if you use services like log analytics or stuff like that, you need to pay for the log analytics usage, right? There's no cost in connecting that server. As soon as you enable log analytics, like for an Azure VM, you pay for that log analytics stuff. And there is another additional part. There is for the policy part, for the guest configuration policy part. There's a certain amount. I think it's, do not quote me on that, but I think it's around $6 a month per node when it comes to, correct? Perfect. I can remember stuff. Huh? Yeah, that's basically the cost. You don't have to use policy if you don't want to, but if you need it, you pay a fixed price per month per node for that. Well, you get the inventory, the whole inventory part. well, update management needs log analytics. Yeah, but it depends on that. I mean, the free part can also be, I mean, if you just want to have an inventory, right? I mean, I don't know. I remember like 5, 6 years or 10 years ago when I was speaking to customers, it was all about ITSM and getting like an inventory. And now in this cloud world and this special world where we have devices and servers and services everywhere, we don't even have network connectivity usually to that, right? So that already helps for me. I think that's already a good thing. I agree. The basic stuff is not, it's not mind-blowing in that case, but then when you extend it with different services, it's a pretty good management solution for that. I also saw a question here, man. So the data service part is currently, since Ignite, in public preview. So we were in private preview since last Ignite, and now since this Ignite, we are in public preview. Kubernetes part is also in public preview. The MS SQL part is in public preview, and the server part is GA. So that is already usable. I mean, you can use the rest as well, but obviously always with that asterisk again, that for support reasons and stuff like that. Don't tell anyone that Thomas said you can use these in productions. Just don't do that. Any other questions? Other than that, I'm also at the, I'm not sure if they serve beer, but if there is beer, we can, okay, perfect. You're also welcome to drink anything else. And we can also talk there a little bit about Azure Arc and the whole hybrid story. Again, there's much, much more than just this. So with that, I want to say thank you very much.